This video is sponsored by MehoDrums. Click the link in the description below to start your free trial today. How's it going, everybody? So, it's been a while since we've done a deep dive into an individual species. I think the last one that we did was the elephant bird, and I wanted to get one more good video out for you guys before I went out on a little bit of an adventure. You see, the entire back half of this month, I'm actually going to be going out on a fossil dig, going back out to the White River Badlands. But before I do, I wanted to take this time to talk about an animal that I've always wanted to give a deep dive to. Honestly, all the way back when I did one of the very first Paleo Catalog Basics videos about Smilodon. Because that's kind of like the quintessential famous saber-tooth cat. But the thing is, Smilodon was just a single part of the much larger group of Machairodontids. And even though it's not the most famous, there's another kind of saber-tooth that, in my opinion, deserves so much more recognition than it gets. And I actually have had this script written for a little while, so I figured what the heck. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about this video's sponsor, MehoDrums. This channel is all about learning all that we can about the natural world. And I assume that if you're a subscriber here, that you also share this passion. And that's why I'm thrilled to talk once again about this video's sponsor, MehoDrums. This is seriously a subscription service that I would not continue to want to work with if I didn't feel like they were delivering a great value. And they absolutely are. MehoDrums is a premier entertaining and educational video subscription service that enriches your overall life experiences with approachable, comprehensive, and illuminating content. They've teamed up with the Great Courses Plus and have a constantly evolving library of new titles that are updated every month, ranging from beginner how-to courses about all sorts of things, all the way up to higher levels of learning that you could normally only get from a college-level course. One of my favorites that I've enjoyed recently is Early Humans, a story of ice, stone, and survival, where Susan Pillar Birch discusses our species' journey out of Africa and across the world. The story of human expansion is one that is constantly changing with every new discovery made. And this new, most recent analysis has provided me with knowledge that I didn't even know. And there's much more than just natural history and paleontology. You could watch courses on learning a new language, learning a new musical instrument, just about any other field of science that you can think of, or you could travel around the world from the comfort of whatever streaming device you use. If you have ever wondered about anything, MehoDrums will be your new favorite place. And they're giving viewers a great offer of a free trial, and by using the link in the description, you'll also be supporting paleoanalysis. You can cancel at any time, so at the very least, I would highly recommend checking this out, at least for the free trial. So please, visit MehoDrums.com/paleoanalysis to start your free trial today. Your brain is truly going to love this place. So let's talk about one of the most successful and arguably not cat-like cats that has ever existed. And another interesting thing about that is that this animal that we're talking about today definitely falls into the category of one of those things that humans have had to face from when we left Africa, and it has followed us literally the entire way as we've spread across the world. We only managed to escape it in a few very small instances. But with all that out of the way, let's get into Homotherium, the scimitar-toothed cat. The story of this feline starts, as far as we know, around 4 million years ago. That's at least as far back as the fossil evidence that we currently have goes. But if you look at the mitochondrial DNA, the story started much longer ago, because that shows that the last time that this cat shared a common ancestor with even other saber-toothed cats like Smilodon was around 18 million years ago. But the genus Homotherium first appeared from this branch of the Machairodontids right around the tail end of the Miocene. And like we talked about in our video about Smilodon, there's actually quite a few things that made this subfamily of cats pretty different than what we're used to thinking of as stereotypical cat features. Because these animals not only split from modern cats, but other Machairodontids as well, this gave them plenty of time to adapt and evolve into very different creatures from either group. Almost everything that we associate with as cat-like is kind of turned on its head with this thing. For one thing, normally all cats seem to be ambush predators. Even cheetahs, which are the most pursuit predators among living cats, try to close as much distance as possible without being seen before charging. But these cats, with long front limbs, shorter back limbs, and a huge nasal opening to take in extra oxygen, are thought to have been pursuit predators more like wolves and hyenas. In fact, with their odd limb proportions and sloping back, this probably gave them a more hyena-like posture than any cat alive today. As another difference, cats are normally nocturnal, solitary hunters. This cat is believed to have been social, with even more evidence to support this than the somewhat uncertain case of Smilodon. And perhaps strangest of all, it's believed to have been a diurnal hunter, that instead of walking around up on its toes in a digitigrade posture, just like every other cat that we know of, it instead walked down on its paws in a more plantigrade posture closer to that of a bear. Its teeth were not as long as the specialized teeth of Smilodon, but they were still flat and blade-shaped, like all of the other Machairodontids. These teeth were much more serrated than the teeth of Smilodon, and thus were much more adapted to cutting. Besides its canine teeth, another difference between it and other cats would be its slightly protruding incisors, which fits well considering the previously mentioned wolves and hyenas have similar dental arrangements to go with a pursuit hunting lifestyle. All of these adaptations made Homotherium a very unique animal among the cat family tree. This is why I find this animal so fascinating, but also why it's one of those animals that I feel like is severely misnamed. Because the name Homotherium translates to same beast. And after going over how odd this creature is, it's pretty clear that there's really nothing same about it. But how did a cat go this far off the beaten path of what it means to be a cat? Well, as it turns out, those unique qualities also happen to be the things that would allow this to be one of the most successful cats to ever live. To be honest, all things considered, I find it very surprising that this cat is less well known than Smilodon. Perhaps it's because of the very extensive amount of fossil evidence we have of Smilodon from places like Rancho La Brea, but this cat was like the quintessential saber-tooth cat that was recognized by different animals all across the world. Smilodon only lived in the Americas. And don't misunderstand me, Smilodon had a great run. They ranged across the southern half of North America and down into Central and South America, becoming 3 distinct species. But like we said in the Smilodon Spotlight video, these animals were kind of hyper-specialized. And although this made them the kings of their habitat in the southern forests across the New World, it prevented them from pushing too far north into the biome known as the Mammoth Steppe. A biome named for its most famous resident, but in fact was the most diverse and expansive region on Earth during the last geological epoch. Imagine a dry, tundra-like grassland teeming with large mammals like horses, bison, muskox, reindeer, rhinos, and elephants. Like, literally, the African Serengeti, only cold. And this Pleistocene safari land would stretch from Western Europe, like Great Britain, which, by the way, at the time was still connected to mainland Europe, all the way across Eurasia, and even to Beringia, and down into mainland North America. This was the largest terrestrial biome on Earth, and is kind of where our typical image of what the Ice Age world looked like stems from. This place was the scimitar cat's secret to success. Now, Homotherium had already evolved by the time the last Ice Age began, but the story of the Cenozoic was a story of gradual cooling and drying since all the way back in the Eocene. And by the time the Pleistocene began, many of the animals that were still around were the ones that were adapted to wide open spaces and grasslands. And during this time, the world would go back and forth between glacial and interglacial periods. And every time that the ice would start to expand at the poles, so too would the mammoth steppe. And this gave the scimitar cat the opportunity to take over the world. As a long-legged pursuit predator with large nasal openings to get oxygen into its lungs and deadly serrated fangs, it was the perfect hunter to take advantage of this habitat. But it was not limited to just the mammoth steppe alone. It was adaptable enough to take advantage of any open grassland environment. And that's how it managed to spread down from Eurasia into Africa. And here is where we would see the earliest signs of this cat making a regular habit of hunting proboscideans, like the massive Dinotherium. Their more serrated teeth likely making cutting through the tough hide of elephants more manageable. Even more so than what we see in modern conical-toothed cats like lions today. But even still, if we are to assume that many different proboscideans practice the same herding behavior that we see in living elephants today, which there's a lot of evidence to support this, then even taking down a baby Dinotherium or mammoth would be a huge risk and challenge. And that's where this beast's final secret would come into play. Now, we've speculated that Smilodon may have had social behavior, but the jury is still kind of out on the final decision there. There's evidence both for and against them living in groups and caring about each other. But with Homotherium, the evidence seems to lean much more towards this behavior. For one thing, just the simple fact that they were hunting elephants semi-regularly. Mind you, they were in fact smaller than Smilodon. But what's more, we see substantially fewer examples of teeth being broken in this cat compared to other Machairodontids like Smilodon. The theory is that if these cats did live in groups, this would allow them to completely immobilize a prey animal with multiple individuals. And only then would the cat draw its scimitars for a killing blow to the neck. This is similar to what we talked about with Smilodon, but considering one was predominantly hunting bison and camels, and the other seemed to have a taste for elephants, this was probably an absolute necessity for Homotherium. The massive success of the scimitar cat would eventually allow it to expand out of the old world, following the mammoths across Beringia and then southward to the new frontier. And this is where it would cross swords with the saber cat. It is unknown exactly when Homotherium crossed into North America, because the opportunity to enter from Beringia would have been available to it several times throughout the Pliocene and Pleistocene. But by this time, in its ancestral home of Eurasia, it seemed to have been starting to struggle. It was gone from Africa around 1.5 million years ago, perhaps as prey like the Dinotherium disappeared and new competition from the conical-toothed cat started to pick up. And originally, it was thought to have died out across Eurasia around 300,000 years ago. However, a fossil specimen found in the North Sea would call this into question, when it was dated to around 28,000 years ago. This points to a bit of an issue that we have with Homotherium that seems to be a bigger deal for this particular species than it does with other Pleistocene carnivores. A comparatively unreliable fossil record, because currently, that's the only specimen that we have to suggest that they survived anywhere in the old world after about 300,000 years ago. But one thing that we do have evidence of is that by the time they were starting to vanish from the old world, they had already started to make the new world their home, spreading across North America and living right alongside their larger, more robust cousins. Now, this was probably possible only because of the fundamental differences between how Smilodon and Homotherium lived. You see, because Smilodon was bigger built and heavier, it couldn't run long distances as effectively as the long-legged Homotherium. Smilodon probably stuck closer to the woodland areas where it had more cover to better lie in wait for the opportunity to ambush its prey. And Homotherium basically did the opposite, sticking to the open grasslands. So the two sabertooths probably avoided each other at all costs, to the point where they probably didn't even hunt at the same time of day. Smilodon was similar to most other cats in this way, hunting mostly in low light hours of the evening and night. In fact, more than likely, this cat had to contend with some of the other predators like the dire wolf, the American lion, the American cheetah, and the short-faced bear far more often than Smilodon. Which isn't all that surprising considering how Arctodus probably was the bane of any other predator on the continent. And since Homotherium probably continued to hunt fairly large mammals like mammoths and ground sloths, they would have been a magnet for the giant bear. But even among these other killers, Homotherium still would have managed to carve out its own place. And we see how successful they were in a few locations, like a particularly interesting cave in Texas. This little-known site is believed to be second only to La Brea, yielding fossils from Pleistocene fauna. We see the remains of peccaries, 400 young Columbian mammoths, dire wolves, and the remains of 30 Homotherium specimens, ranging from very old animals to cubs and everything in between. This is the single best Homotherium site we have, and it is from this cave where many of the hypotheses about how this animal lived has come from. This site shows that there is a strong possibility that these cats were social, and that they hunted young mammoths. Again, 400 baby mammoth individuals. They may have relied on dragging their kills into secluded places like caves to better defend their food against other predators, like the previously mentioned giant bear. But this cat was still not done expanding. There was still one continent left. Like I said before, we don't actually know when the first Homotheriums actually arrived in North America, but we know that they were definitely here well over 1 million years. Because by 1.8 million years ago, they had apparently arrived in South America as well, meaning that they were right there with Smilodon and many of the other northern animals during the Great Biotic Interchange, when the land bridge first formed between North and South America. Unfortunately, this would be the end of the road for the cat that took over the world, because when it got here, it would have its advance stopped by the one thing it really wasn't adapted to. Now, at this time, the northern half of South America wasn't as heavily forested as it is today, but it was still much more than the scimitar cat preferred. But you know who didn't mind the patchy forests and clearings of Ice Age Brazil? Its cousin, the sabertooth. And as a result, it would then find itself in direct competition with Smilodon, the cat that it had made a living trying to avoid. And what's worse, Smilodon would do so well here in South America, it would become even larger than the North American species Smilodon fatalis, becoming Smilodon populator. And to make things even worse, the terror of the Americas would do the same, with the giant bear Arctodus evolving into the even larger Arctotherium, the biggest terrestrial mammalian carnivore ever. With beasts like this to compete with, and the habitat itself not exactly being ideal for it, it's unknown exactly how long Homotherium lasted in South America. It's only known from a handful of remains found in Venezuela. So at the very least, it seems like they never managed to spread nearly as far south as Smilodon. And now, with the world changing and the Ice Age coming to an end, some of the places where it had already learned how to make its living were about to change. By the late Pleistocene, this highly adaptive creature had already vanished from its ancestral home across the Old World. They died out first in Africa, then, despite lasting much longer than previously thought in Europe and Asia, eventually disappeared there as well. probably caused from the mammoth steppe slowly starting to shrink and be replaced by forests around 28,000 years ago. And they would be pushed back from the new frontier of South America by a land that favored its competitors more than the scimitar cat. So North America was really its final refuge, and this would remain the case until around 12,000 years ago. And this coincides with the extinction that came for a wide variety of different large mammals around this time. Now, one of the main causes that we like to attribute to this extinction is human hunting. And some say that climate change brought on by the end of the Ice Age was a more likely cause. And still some point to a yet unknown disaster or even the outbreak of some sort of disease. Now, me personally, I tend to lean toward a combination between the first two possibilities. As I've said before, the likelihood of humans at this point in our history, with the population that we had being the sole cause of a mass extinction, is something that I find very unlikely on its own. But when you add another apex predator to an environment at a time when there's a great amount of ecological upheaval, that's a recipe for disaster. Don't forget, Homotherium was actually right there with us right from when we spread out of Africa. So for the entirety of the story of our species' expansion across the world, these cats were right there. They likely viewed us as potential prey, and I highly doubt that we were likely the direct cause of their extinction. After all, these cats had gotten very good at living alongside other predators. They needed two things to survive: big animals to hunt, and wide open spaces to hunt them. And unfortunately, around 12,000 years ago, both of those things were getting increasingly hard to find. It's believed that around the same time where the last mammoths died out on the mainland, so too did the scimitar-toothed cat. Understand, I'm not excusing humans and saying that we've never done anything to exterminate life before. Specifically, when you're talking about during the Pleistocene, though, I think that we try to vilify ourselves more than we really deserve. Because the fact of the matter is, at that time, we were just a species trying to survive. But that's the takeaway. That's the way that I prefer to put it. It's not that we killed everything. It's that it was already a bad situation from a climactic and geological standpoint. There was a lot of change going on, and during a time of change, things are vulnerable. And the last thing most ecosystems need during times of great change is another apex predator. These animals were absolutely not a failure of evolution. In fact, quite the opposite. Homotherium managed to spread across every continent on Earth except for Australia and Antarctica. The only cat that has ever surpassed this geological range is domestic cats, and they had help. The only wild cats that have ever come close was lions at their peak, and today we have the puma. But especially as far as the saber-toothed cats go, this creature was a definite success story. It's a group of cats that for whatever reason, we have no living examples of today. And the more we learn about them, the more clear it becomes that these animals are not just simply cats with longer teeth. These were entirely different creatures than anything we have today. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you gave it a like. I know we all say this, but ultimately likes and comments are how we get our stuff picked up by the algorithm and how we get our content seen by more people. And in this social media environment, that is how we survive. Once again, I would like to thank MehoDrums for sponsoring today's video. Go to the link in the description if you would like to try out their free trial. I highly recommend it. Alright, that's all I have for today. Have a good one, everybody.